Great. Whenever you're ready.
Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Sunset Committee Subcommittee meeting. And I believe, Aaron, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but we begin with a roll call to see who from the committee is here.
Yes, thank you. I will just go down the list, and if you are joining and you haven't been promoted to a panelist yet and you hear your name called, just raise your hand. So, Alan Lloyd,
Present?
great. Senator Zolnikoff is not here. Stacey Anderson,
Here.
okay. Tanner Avery
Present.
and Webb Brown.
Here.
We have Bob Dean yet.
Present.
Oh, perfect. Representative Etchart. No. Okay. Senator Harvey. No. Jennifer Hensley. Not yet. Okay. Senator Noland.
Here.
Sierra Riceburg.
Here.
Representative Seckinger.
Here.
Representative Teal.
Here.
And Gail Tronstad.
Present.
Great. That is it for staff. Aaron Sullivan, policy analyst with the Department of Labor and Industries Legal Division. And we also have Jennifer Stallkamp for our Deputy Chief Legal Counsel. And then finally, Lisa Patzer to run all of our technology. And help me out in case I mess up this presentation, which I might. And that's it.
Hey,
Fantastic.
Erin.
Yes.
Sorry, Jen Hensley's on the phone.
She
And she
ended,
can't figure out.
is she ended in 314? Do you know?
Yes, that's her.
Perfect. Okay, didn't know.
She couldn't find the raise hand.
Yeah, I don't
On
think
your
you
phone.
can. I don't think you can when you're, I don't think you can be, I don't know.
It's
Lisa, can you try to figure that out?
it's star 6 to unmute and star 9, I think, to raise your hand.
Okay, I don't see
Good
how I
deal.
can promote her to a panelist. But Lisa can try to work on that while we get going. No, cancel. Okay. And if we can, and Jen, if we can end up promoting you, then just raise your hand when you want to talk and we'll let you talk, of course. Okay. Oh, got it.
I'll see Jane's name there.
Okay.
So, Aaron, with that, from the agenda, I see that the first
Hi, everybody.
item of our business here is to review the work plan. I didn't know if you wanted to walk us through that. The document that was attached represented my understanding of what we plan to do, but I think it's important for us to go through that and make sure that it lines up for everybody else as well.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Pick the right one. And can everybody see that document?
Yes.
Recording in progress.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And let's just make sure that if you are not presenting or speaking, that you mute your microphones. So I think we've got everybody. Okay, so this is the work plan that I came up with. This is just a draft, and this is for your discussion and approval, I guess, for today. The plan is, if you were on the healthcare call last week, then you kind of understand that each of the subcommittees is going to be presented with a draft work plan that summarizes what happened at the organizational meeting, the topics that you discussed and were interested in and wanted to prioritize. There's also a recap of the executive order initiatives that each subcommittee has identified that they're going to keep in mind as they go through their work. And then the idea is that the co-chairs will present these work plans to the full task force at our April 13th meeting in Helena. And so if, again, these are living documents, they can obviously be changed as things happen and, priorities change, but this is just kind of a baseline and to really help the co-chairs prepare for that April 13th meeting. So the first page or the second page, I guess, after the title page, talks about the topics that were discussed at the organizational meeting. So this committee decided that they wanted to focus on a historical review of sunsets in Montana, and then talk about some criteria for what a sunset review could look like. And I just identified some of those, like what body performs the review, how often would it occur, if it occurs at like what level, is it the board level, occupational level, a requirement level, or all three? And then what is going to be reviewed, like what questions are being asked and answered, and then if it should be a true sunset process or just a review process. So that's what I picked up from the first meeting. And again, if there's stuff in here that I got wrong, please let me know. And then the final topic really was if there were examples that the committee can follow, like other states or even within this state. So I won't rehash all of the initiatives that the committee talked about, but those are listed at the bottom of the page. And so this is just keep this in mind as you're doing your work. These are really the questions that we want to address and hopefully provides recommendations for the governor's report. And then the final page is just a quick schedule of planned activities. If any of you guys worked with me, legislative services, you'll see this looks familiar to the work plans I used to do, where it's each meeting and kind of what is going to be discussed and just kind of laying out your work. We only have a few meetings, and so we have a lot to get done in a short amount of time. So this again is based on the discussions that we had a month ago. You can change this. You can reorder it if you want. It really is dependent on you and what you learned today. But obviously for today, we're reviewing the work plan, and then I've prepared a presentation on the history of sunset reviews in Montana. I did put on here review data requests there was really only one that I was able to pull together that I thought would be, I don't even know if it's helpful now, but it was one that was easy because it was already put together, and that's the governor's report. We can certainly discuss that during this meeting if you would like. But the other data requests that were suggested or requested at the last meeting, I'm still working on, and so I can provide those to you as they get completed. It's a lot of information, so a lot of digging, which I like. It's fine. And then for every meeting, there's going to be public comment, obviously. So the outline that we kind of discussed at the last meeting was to do this history today, and then at the next meeting, look at other states' approaches to sunset reviews. And so for that meeting, we'll do a topic review. We'll also address any outstanding issues, because today you can identify any further issues that you would like, and we can work that into the plan. And then in May, we're planning on discussing boards and programs. And so that's really getting into like the crux of what a potential sunset review could look like. And I think at that point, I will be able to have the history of the boards. I know that was a data request that was asked for, and I'm working on it. There's little pieces to it. I thought it would be easy, like, oh, this is when this was created. And no, it's not, because things were renamed and things were merged, and it's really quite fascinating. So I want to have a very good work product for you for that one, and so that's why I don't have it prepared today. But part of that discussion can be the criteria that I talked about just a couple minutes ago, and then obviously identifying any further issues. In June, we can start on some options and recommendations, unless there is further research that you guys wanted to have presented to you, which obviously you can identify as we go along, and hopefully develop some recommendations in June, kind of pencil those out. And then at our final meeting in July, we'll review the recommendations, make revisions as necessary, and really finalize the final recommendations to present to the full task force. So that's how I penciled out this committee's work. Mr. Chair, if you want to discuss, and I can take notes, and we can revise as needed. And so I can have a final draft work plan for you and Senator Zolnikoff for April.
Standing. Aaron, thank you for the work. The only thing that jumped out to me was in the member topics. We don't have the review of other states. It's in the plan at the bottom, but it just didn't make it into the member top. I think everything else aligns in the 2 pages, but I'd also just open the floor to anybody else that has any other thoughts, recommendations, or questions. And I'm going to work under the assumption that if somebody raises their hand, they will jump up in my view, but I do not know that that is the case.
Yeah, I don't see anybody has their hand raised. What, Web?
Webb, the floor is yours.
Mr. Chair, Aaron, thanks for all the work there. And I'm sending you something separately as well that we did on Board of Dentistry. Mr. Chair, do you need a motion on this? Aaron, are we approving the work plan or just commenting on it?
No, so this is there's really no votes in this subcommittee or the task force. It's consensus, and
Okay.
so no motions are necessary. Just
Okay.
discuss and give directions for me, and otherwise we can move forward.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to move it if we need to do that for discussion, but I think it looks good, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the work that's gone into this. It is a condensed time frame, I understand that, so I know we need to keep moving on it, but I think it covers everything as far as I'm concerned. Thanks.
Thank you, Webb. Any other thoughts or questions? And as Aaron said, this is a living document, and so if thoughts pop into heads, feel free to share those. But with that, I will move us along for what I'm looking forward to most of the day is the presentation of the history of sunset reviews in Montana. And so with that, Aaron, I will hand the stage over to you to
Okay.
learn us up.
Okay, so I am going to hopefully do this correctly. Gonna do this screen now, sharing. And if everybody could let me know if you can see the my background, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, now. Come on.
For those that were not early to the call, this was a technology issue, and it appears Aaron has solved it. So congratulations.
I solved it with Lisa's help. I'm very much appreciative of her. Okay, so I'm going to, I got to figure out my screens. Okay, so everybody can see, just all you can see is the title slide, correct? You don't see my any notes or the next slide. I just want to make sure that I am looking at this correctly.
I see your
Yes,
floating head in front of it, but other than
we
that,
can see
Okay,
you
I
as
need to
well.
okay, I need to figure that out.
no, I
Sorry.
thought that was the coolest part of it.
No, I don't want to do that. It was under the share settings. I don't want to be in front.
Too late.
I think you can minimize my floating head. I don't want to distract from the slides. Let's see here. So give me a second and ugh, another share. I don't know where it went. Yeah, I was messing around with the layout. Here we go. That's what it is. Content only. There, am I gone?
You're
You are
gone.
gone.
Thank you. I don't like that. Okay, so we are going to go through the this presentation that I put together, and I will I don't know, for those of you that know me, you know that I have a 10-year-old daughter. She's pretty sassy. She helped me. She was very interested in this presentation as I was putting it together, and she wanted to hear me practice. And so it started off great, and she was like, Mom, that's fascinating. Wow. And then as I got into it, she's like, all right, that's enough. I don't want to watch it. I don't want any more. It's too much. So if you are a history buff and you like policy, you will probably like this presentation. Okay. So let me see if I can do. Okay, now I gotta figure out how to advance the slide. Sorry. And clearly I don't present that often, and so I don't know what happened to. Oh, maybe this way. There we go. Okay, so this timeline that I have here is really more of the outline that we're going to go through. And so there were some various sunset type policies that have been enacted in law throughout the years. We're going to start with a brief discussion on the executive reorganization that occurred in the early 1970s. And then the main focus of this presentation is going to discuss the actual sunset laws that were put into place between 1977 and 1983. We'll jump forward 20 years and I'm going to touch on a couple studies that aren't specific to sunsets, but they were studies that pertain to occupational licensing boards, and they resulted in a couple pieces of legislation. And so I thought that was just something to throw in there. And then the last thing that we'll talk about is what happened between 2011 and 2015 when the interim committees were required to review licensing boards. So the next slide. So executive reorganization. This was from 1969, excuse me, until 1973, and the enacting legislation was Chapter 293, Laws of 1969. So the Executive Reorganization Commission, it was established in 1969. Since the state was founded in 1889, Montana established the executive branch, and it had expanded significantly as the legislature created new agencies to meet social, economic, demographic needs that were emerging. But the legislature often created new autonomous agencies for specific functions, even when they were overlapping with existing ones. And so what that did is it resulted in a fragmented and inefficient organizational structure. So enter the Montana Commission on Executive Reorganization. It was established in 1969 to study the executive branch and recommend a comprehensive reorganization. And the commission's mandate included producing a detailed report and proposing any necessary legislation to implement the reorganization. So apparently reorganization had been attempted at least 6 times in the past before this 1969 one. But none of those attempts really produced anything meaningful. And so this was the big one. And part of the reason why this came about was there was a 1970 constitutional amendment that was passed by the people of Montana, and it was called the 20 Agency Constitutional Amendment. And so what it did is it required the legislature to reduce the number of executive agencies to no more than 20. And that excludes the 7 elected constitutional offices. And so those plus 20, that's the max you can have. And that had to be done by July 1st of 1973. So this requirement really did guide the commission's work. So due to time, staff, funding constraints, this commission was funded, but it didn't have a lot of money. What the commission decided was to focus on a functional survey. And what that did is it examined what each agency did and grouped them with similar functions. So the staff it started off with 17 functional categories, and then one was later added in. And what they believed those 18 different functions encompassed all of the state executive functions. And then the commission also evaluated whether multi-member bodies, such as boards or advisory councils, should be retained or abolished or modified. And how they did that is they examined whether their functions were administrative, advisory, quasi-legislative, or quasi-judicial, So the commission concluded that purely administrative functions should be handled by a single administrator and not multi-member bodies. And because advisory councils lacked consistency and were often redundant, most of the advisory councils were recommended for abolition, unless they were federally required for funding, or if they had highly significant issues such as conservation. And then some multi-member bodies, especially the professional and occupational licensing boards, they were all retained for not all of them, sorry. Most of them were retained, but for their quasi-legislative and quasi-judicial purposes. And so rulemaking and hearings is what those boards really were allowed to continue on, but their administrative duties were shifted to a department led by a single administrator. So here's the results of the reorganization. You can see on the left, the pre-commission, there were about 188 executive agencies, and the majority of those were agencies headed by policymaking multi-member bodies, so boards and advisory committees. You can see 77 boards and 53 advisory committees. There were obviously the 7 elected constitutional officers, and there were a few other agencies, only 10, that were headed by single executives appointed by the governor. And so as a work of the reorganization, the commission recommended 18 principal departments. And so I have all of those listed. You can see some of them are the same name as they are now. A lot of them are not, and don't necessarily exist any longer. So business regulation is one. Institutions, I think, I'm assuming, became Department of Corrections. So there's a few different names that they came up with, but they established these 18 agencies and then reorganized all of the boards and advisory committees that were going to remain in existence went under one of these 18 principal departments, and then many, many more were abolished. And so for our purposes, we're really going to kind of focus on the Department of Professional and Occupational Licensing. So you can see on this slide that labor and industry is here, and it still exists, or it was in existence then. But the professional and occupational licensing was a separate department with this restructure. So what the reorganization did is it, again, established the Department of Professional and Occupational Licensing and then put all of these boards underneath. And so similar to how it is set up now within the Department of Labor and Industry, we have administratively attached boards. So the department provides the administrative functions for the boards, but the boards retain their quasi-legislative and quasi-judicial functions. You can see on here a lot of these. This is what they were called back in 1970. And so they were a lot wordier, or whatever. There's some that are still in existence. There's some that are not. There's some that have gone to different agencies, and so water well contractors and water wastewater operators, those are not under the Department of Labor. And I think there was another one that moved, the Horse Racing Commission. So that moved to the Department of Commerce eventually. But as of this report, this is how this department was organized. Okay, so next we'll go into, this is really, I think, the crux of what you guys wanted to hear about. In 1977, there was a law that was passed that established a sunset review process and automatically terminated agencies. And so that ran from 1977 to 1983. It was Chapter 562 Laws of 1977, and it was actually codified in the RCMs instead of the MCAs. And so that's why you'll see a different section numbers. So 82-4601 through 82-4609 were the sunset laws in 1977. So you can see that as originally enacted in 1977, approximately 47 agencies were to be reviewed by the Legislative Audit Committee. And it was that committee would figure out whether to terminate the agency, to reestablish the agency, or to modify the agency. And so there was about a third of them were reviewed each interim, and they had to have a performance audit done by the Legislative Audit Division, who then presented it to the Legislative Audit Committee. The agencies automatically terminated unless there was an affirmative bill that passed the following session that reestablished the agency. So this was all set up. It was going to keep going and going and going every 6 years, start the cycle over again, but it actually only lasted one complete 6-year cycle. So in 1983, there was some modifications that were made to these statutes, which I'll get into in a little bit. So the specifics, the purpose and intent of the sunset laws were to control government growth by periodically questioning whether agencies and programs and rules are still necessary, or if they should be reduced or eliminated. And that was actually defined in the legislative intent. And intent said that by requiring periodic evaluation in the form of a performance audit, the legislature would be in a better position to ensure that agencies and programs exist only to be responsive to state citizens' needs. So prior to each termination date, a performance audit had to be performed, and part of that audit required a thorough examination of these 6 questions. And these were actually listed out in statute. So number 1 is the absence of would the absence of regulation significantly harm or endanger the public health, safety, or welfare? As we all know, that is the purpose of licensing, is to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. And so it really had to look at that and if it was doing its job, basically. Number 2, is there a reasonable relationship between the exercise of the state's police power and the protection of the public health, safety, and welfare? A huge part of the audits was number 3, if there was another less restrictive method of regulation available that could still adequately protect the public. Number 4, if the regulation had direct or indirect increase in costs for the consumers. And if so, what was the extent of that? And then number 5, if the increase in cost is more harmful to the public, then what harm could result if there were no regulation? And then finally, number 6 is the reviews had to look at all facets of the regulatory process and see if they were all designed solely for the purpose of and have as their primary effect protection of the public. So huge theme. Making sure that the boards were actually doing what their intent was, which was to protect public health, safety, and welfare.
Erin, this is Jen.
Yes.
Really, really quickly, can you remind me from the last slide when those sunset specifics were codified? I didn't get it in my notes.
1977.
Thanks.
So agencies had a huge part to play in this. 22 months before the audits were completed, they had to provide a lot of justification basically for their existence. And so part of those were they had to define the goals of the program and say whether it's, if the goals are statutorily sound, constitutionally sound, or if they came as a result of some other official decision. And then they also had to, in their reports, they had to define clear and testable objectives that showed how spending connects with results, how results connect with objectives, and how objectives actually address the problems tied to the program's goals. So a lot of preparatory work was needed by the actual agencies before these audits were completed. Some additional provisions that were in the sunset laws. Before terminating any agency, the legislature had to hold a public hearing, and so there had to be, bill hearings and all sorts of stuff like that, and then gather input from the public, the agency's leadership, and also the review team, which is the audit division. And so I feel, again, I was a wee baby when all of this was happening, but I feel like this would be basically what happens in legislative audit now. The audit committee, they hear presentations about the performance audits that are done, or the financial audits or the compliance audits that are done by the audit division. And so I imagine it was pretty much the same process. If the audit committee did end up recommending termination, then the agency had another chance. It wasn't completely all for naught, but they had to prove why they were still needed. And then there was another option that they could propose modifications to the board or the program, and justify that these changes could either improve public protection or reduce any negative market impacts that were happening as a result of the regulation. And then it was also provided in the law that when deciding whether to reestablish an agency, the legislature had to consider the performance audit, all public testimony, and any other relevant information. And so those audits were really, they were key, as well as the stakeholder participation were key in these committees, the audit committee's decisions to terminate an agency or reestablish, either way. A couple other provisions. If an agency was terminated, it didn't just cease to exist as of that day. There was a wind down period. So it could operate until July 1st of its next year to finish winding down its work. And so there was like an offboarding process, if you will. And during that period, the agency still had authority for the program, but they couldn't take any actions that would extend beyond that 1 year period. And so once July 1 of the following year comes, then everything needs to be wrapped up and done. If there was any remaining funds, it would revert to the original fund, or if that fund was also terminated, then it would go to the general fund. If an agency was reestablished, so if the audit went great and the Legislative Audit Committee said, yes, we're going to continue on with this program, then they could continue it for up to 6 years before another review would need to be required. And they could do any increment. And so if they just wanted to reestablish it for 2 years, they were allowed to do that. They could do 4, they could do 6, but 6 was the max. And so the idea was that this would be a continuous 6-year cycle for reviewing these agencies. And then that's how it would go. And then any new agency or program that was enacted. So if there was a new board that was proposed, it had to have an automatic termination date built into the bill. And that was 6 years. And so it said, any new agency or program that if it regulated a business, profession, or an occupation, must terminate July 1 of the third regular legislative session after it was created, and a sunset review would be required, or a performance review. So this was the grand idea. It lasted 1 cycle, but the performance reviews are all available in the archives with the Historical Society. They're fascinating. I think, most of them. And so if anybody is interested in a particular board, then let me know and I can send it to you. But again, or you can go onto the archives and find them. But I found them to be very interesting. They all had a very similar structure. As far as the performance reviews go, there was an introduction. It summarized all of the objectives, the law behind it, organized it, and scoped out, exactly what they were going to report on. There was sometimes brief history, sometimes quite extensive history, depending on the occupation, but history of the regulation. And that actually included the current law. It included how other states regulate. And it also had lots of details in that section about the board itself, when the board was created, their organization, their operations, staffing, objectives, all of that kind of stuff. Then it went into those 6 questions that I talked about earlier. So each one of the audits had to address all of those questions, and some were way more detailed than others. It did include data on regulation in other states, and so that could help the Legislative Audit Committee inform their decisions. And there was also a discussion, some more robust than others, depending on what the audit was, on deregulation or the less restrictive forms of regulation. And in that, they did kind of a pro-con analysis of each of the different types of regulation and how it could affect the industry. And then finally, most of the audits had what were called legislative considerations. I think now we call them audit recommendations. But this was really I think the summary and the meat and the recommendations of the audit division for the Legislative Audit Committee to look at when they were deciding on if the agency should be, or the board, whatever you want to call it, should be reestablished, terminated, or modified. So I just wanted to show a couple as I was going through. I just took some screenshots just so you could kind of see what they looked like. So these were the very early reports. This was the first round that was done. You can see the Board of Abstractors here, 1978, and then Board of Real Estate, 1978. And so that's what the covers of these reports looked like. This one I thought was funny. It's like the only one. It looks like a fancy composition book, but it's the Board of Warm Air Heating, Ventilation, and Air Conditioning. So the early reports looked like this, and then in the second interim, the reports had a little more substance on the front. And so you can see, I just pulled Board of Nursing, for example, from 1979, that it talks about this is what this report is, and then it says this report presents 12 areas for legislative consideration and includes, some of the highlights of what those audit recommendations basically were. And then here's just a couple more. These, I put these on here because both of these boards were terminated. And so what I saw on here is that it doesn't actually say these boards should be terminated or we recommend this, but they do have in the areas for legislative consideration for Board of Athletics, you could see the need for regulating professional boxing and professional wrestling. So they really talked about the necessity of it in this report. And then for Board of Podiatry, this one said the need for a separate board. So that could be a clue. Oh, does this really need to be a separate board? We're not going to tell you, but we're going to give you some data on that because this board at the time licensed 34 podiatrists and only had $1,000 of revenue. A couple other things that I found in the audits that I thought was really interesting when they talked about the different types of regulation and the relationship between public protection and state regulation. There were some interesting little charts and decision trees. This just I thought was interesting. It's how they kind of came about if how a profession should be regulated. So those were in many of the audits. The more extensive audits had a lot more discussion on the different types of regulation. But then there was also this table, and I found this in several audits as well, that talked about the different types. So there's 7 different types, or 6 really. Oops. I don't know how to go back. There we go. There's really 6 types of regulation and then no regulation. And so licensing, practice, reserve of title. And in these reports, they actually explain like what they mean by each of these. And when I said there was a pro-con analysis, this is really kind of what they delved into. And so I just thought these were interesting. So I wanted to throw them into the presentation for you. Okay, so some results. So for the first interim, and that was the period that ended July 1st, 1979, you can see there was 3 different agencies that had boards or offices that were reviewed. So obviously for us, Department of Professional and Occupational Licensing, that's what we really care about. You can see all of these boards were reestablished. I guess the Board of County Printing at some point in time was thrown in there. And then the 3 that were terminated were the Board of Abstractors, Board of Real Estate, and the State Board of Warm Air Heating, Ventilation, and Air Conditioning. Not to be singled out, the Department of Institutions was also evaluated, as was the State Auditor's Office. You can see that securities and insurance were reestablished. This Board of Institutions was terminated, though. I don't have any details on that. And then in 1981, the rest of the professional and occupational licensing boards were evaluated. So you can see that most of them, again, were reestablished. There was a Department of Social and Rehabilitation Services at some point in time that had the Board of Veterans Affairs. And then the Commission for Human Rights was also reestablished. There were 4 boards that were terminated in this second iteration: the Board of Athletics, Board of Massage Therapists, Board of Osteopathic Physicians, and Board of Podiatry Examiners. And then in the final period, you can see that so professions and occupations, they did all of those reviews in the first 2 interims. So these ones were different agencies, but I will point out that Montana Outfitters Council, that's now the Board of Outfitters and Guides, but at the time it was under the Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. So that was how that one happened. And then keep in mind this July 1, 1983 date. So this was the third interim, and that was when all of these were reviewed. In 1983, however, this law was modified. And so as we know, session happens at the beginning of the year. So the laws had already been modified before this review was completed. These reviews, excuse me. So like I said, the performance audits, they didn't recommend termination or reestablishment, but because that was up to the Legislative Audit Committee to review the audits and then provide those determinations. But the audits did provide areas for legislative consideration, so clues. And they varied. it wasn't just answering those 6 questions. They really did take a holistic view of the entire board and the operations and everything. And so there was lots of different considerations depending on which audit it is. I didn't read them all. Like I said, there's a lot, and some of them were 150 pages, so I just didn't have time to read through them all. But there were definitely themes and considerations on licensing fees, the board's structure, scope of practice, all of that stuff was evaluated. And some of the recommendations that were provided within the whole portfolio of audits did result in some general statutory changes. So some of those that I found, this all happened in 1981. So this was after the first round of reviews. Yes. The appointment process to boards, licensing fee structure, the compensation and travel expenses for board members, and disciplinary authority of boards. Those were kind of all over the place between all the different boards. Now, remember, these were all like separate agencies at one point in time, and then they were merged together. And so, as far as standardization of processes, that just wasn't a thing back then. We know it. We work on it very hard now. But some of these, but they were definitely called out as not being standardized operations back then. And so there were separate bills. I put all of that on there for reference for people, that the appointment process recommendation resulted in 37-1-132, 134 for licensing fee structure, 136 for the disciplinary authority. So all boards had the same disciplinary authority. And then compensation and travel expenses is 133. So I believe all of those statutes are still in existence. They probably have been modified since 1981, but that was when they were established, and the reason why they were established. A couple interesting things that was also pointed out in 3 of the audits. There was a notice that citizenship was a qualification for licensure, and the courts, including the United States Supreme Court, had found that to be unconstitutional. And so there was a bill in 1981 to strike that qualification from pharmacy, optometry, and real estate. And then there were also some additional registration requirements for some of the occupations, like to register with the county clerk. And the audits found that these licenses are licensed by the state. There is no real purpose to have a county registration as well. We now have a law that specifically talks about that in Title VII, which is for local governments, but at the time that didn't exist. And so there was a bill to strike that additional registration requirement from pharmacy, optometry, acupuncture, and veterinary medicine. Again, I didn't go through all of the audits. I wasn't really cognizant back then, and so I wouldn't have any idea what they actually talked about at these committee meetings. But there were some clues in the considerations that could have resulted in why the 7 boards that were terminated from professional and occupational licensing actually were terminated. The two biggest ones that I think were pretty obvious was there was a constitutionality challenge within the Board of Warm Air, Heating, Ventilation, and Air Conditioning. So that board was established and then immediately challenged by in the courts as licensing of that being unconstitutional for whatever reason. There's a huge discussion in that audit, so if you're interested, you can read it. But they actually, this board never really got up and running. Because they were being challenged the entire time in existence, they didn't really function. And so to me, I feel like that's probably why that board was terminated. But again, I don't know. The Board of Osteopathic Physicians and Board of Podiatry Examiners, they were terminated and their functions were merged with the Board of Medical Examiners. And in both of those audits, it did cite that there was a very low number of licensees and revenue. And then also there was some split authority. So the Board of Medical Examiners actually had some authority over these professions in addition to having these boards. And so that's a clue that potentially that was why those boards were were terminated. The other four, not so easy to really pick up without going through a full legislative history. But I did see that some of the discussions, like in the Board of Real Estate audit, talked about how there's multiple regulating entities and statutes, and then there was a limit of authority on the regulation by the board. The Board of Athletics, there were some changes in licensing just in general, a national change in the regulation of it. So that was discussed a lot in that audit. For the Board of Massage Therapy, there was discussion and legislative considerations on scope of practice. On inspections, the board had authority to do inspections, but they hadn't actually done any inspections. And then there was also a call out about how the board was maybe using its discretion for licensing, which would be outside of their authority. And then for Board of Abstractors, there was just a huge industry change. And it wasn't really a common practice anymore in the late 1970s. I think it had moved on to title insurance. And so there was discussion in that audit about how the industry itself was changing. So again, these are just clues. I don't know all the answers, but I do have copies of these audits if anybody wants to read them. Okay, so in 1983, the law was changed. So this was right when they were finishing up their third round of reviews. And in Chapter 321, the laws of 1983 moved it to not an automatic termination or required termination, but just a recommendation for performance audits. And you can actually see those laws now. They are within Title II, Chapter 8, 101 through 8-121. So some specifics on those, on this law. So what it says is that the governor can submit a list to the Legislative Audit Division on the agencies and programs that it wishes to have reviewed in that interim, and obviously there has to be a reason for it. And so that governor's list has to include reasons for recommending each of the agencies to be audited. And then the audit committee would review that list along with any input from legislators, committees, staff, and other relevant sources. This is what happens now with the audit division when they are choosing their work for the interim. They decide, they pick out programs and agencies and all sorts of stuff to review. So they're just preparing for their work, but they do, according to this law, they do look at whatever the governor recommends. And then the committee compiles its own recommendations and submits them to the legislature as a bill. So programs were added to the law in this. So before it was just agency, and now it says programs. And so a program is any function, project, or duty created by law or by an agency. And so it just expanded the breadth of what could be reviewed. And then some additional provisions. If the review couldn't be completed, then the committee had to submit a bill to reestablish the agency in the next legislative session. And going back to the big key that was the legislative intent of the original sunset audits is that the reviews really need to focus on the impact of public health, safety, and welfare. So always going back to that three. So one just kind of case study, I guess, that kind of showed this law in action happened in 1985. And so there was an election initiative in 1984 to establish the Board of Dentistry. I can't pronounce it right. So that's how I'm going to pronounce it. And that it was barely passed, but the board was created. However, there was a law that was passed in 1985 that said that the audit division had to review it under a couple of the specific criteria statutes within that 2-8- or Part 1. And the additional requirement was to evaluate whether the board had actually licensed enough denturists to remain viable. So it actually said in the bill that if by October 1st, 1986, the board has not licensed at least 30 practicing denturists in Montana, or if they have otherwise failed to show fiscal viability, and then the audit committee can introduce a bill to merge with the Board of Dentistry. And that is what happened in 1987. And then furthermore, in that law, it did point out that if it was merged, then the statute did specify the board's new composition. And so you can see this is what it said back then. is that the board's new composition, if these two boards were merged, had to have 4 dentists, 1 dental hygienist, 1 denturist, and then 2 public members, one of whom had to be a senior citizen representative. So that's it for that. So that's kind of how it functions now. Those laws are still in effect to some extent. Again, I'm sure they have been amended over the years, but I didn't get into the details on that. A couple studies just to highlight for you guys that happened in 2003 and 2005. So one of them was assigned to the Legislative Audit Committee, and then the other one was assigned to Economic Affairs. So the objectives, again, these weren't sunset audits, or excuse me, they weren't sunset studies, but they were specific to boards. And so HJ20 in 2003 actually called for limited scope performance audits to be performed. And really what they wanted to look at in those were fees, disciplinary actions, administrative functions, the composition and membership of boards, and then exam and experience requirements. So a lot of what the audits did look at back 20 years prior, that's what they wanted it to look at, but they didn't want a full scope audit for each of the boards. And then in SJ35, which was a follow-up to HJ20, that one directed the interim committee to look at the role of licensing boards and then look at potential board consolidation or subgroups and membership, rulemaking authority, and then sunrise provisions, which is what we have now to an extent. So the outcomes, HJ20 resulted in 1 bill, and really that was House Bill 203 of 2005, and it just clarified the responsibility of boards and also Department of Labor and Industry. It updated a bunch of terminology. It made some updates to qualifications and made updates to board composition. In 2007, the results from the SJ35 study of 2005 were two bills. One that established the procedures for boards. So those are the sunrise provisions that are in 2.8 Part 9, I think. I could be wrong on where those are, but those are still in existence. And then also the establishing the joint meetings provision that is in Title 37, Chapter 1. And saying that like boards should meet jointly, I think every 2 years. I don't know the law off the top of my head, but that provision that's in our statutes now, that was a result of this study. Okay, we're getting towards the end. So in 2011, there was a bill, that House Bill 525, and it required interim committees to review licensing boards and advisory councils. And so that one was Chapter 330, Laws of 2011, and resulted in one statute, 37-1-142 MCA. The original bill was to terminate in 2018. However, you can see 2014, the timeline got cut in half. So what this bill required was a periodic legislative review of the 33 professional, occupational, and licensing boards, and it was assigned to the Economic Affairs Interim Committee. And they did spend 2 full interims analyzing whether each board should continue, be reorganized, or have duties reassigned. So this bill resulted in basically a sunset study by the interim committee. And they spent like I said, they spent 2 interims doing this. It was supposed to repeat, but then the bill got terminated, or that law got terminated. So the purpose is, again, is the board necessary for public health, safety, and welfare? It also wanted to look at the financial solvency, fee structures, all of that kind of stuff. Evaluating scope of practice, national standards, consumer protection rules and complaints. So a holistic view of the board, and then also to identify any overlap between professions and any potential competitive or antitrust concerns. So these were the planned reviews. This is what happened in the 2011-2012 session, interim. The Economic Affairs Interim Committee reviewed these boards, and they kind of went from the oldest boards to the newest boards. That's really I think that's how they divided their work out. And so you can see like these boards in 2011 and 2012 are among the first boards that were ever created. And again, I'll have that history for you guys in a couple weeks, and so you can see what I mean. And then in 2013, 2014, they reviewed the rest of them. Let's see here. So the review included a lot of surveying to stakeholders, and really collecting a lot of feedback from the stakeholders based on that survey. And then each board had to come to at least one hearing during that interim time frame, and basically present their justification to the interim committee. So they received about 3,800 responses to the surveys, which is great. That was over the course of the 4 years, over the course of the review process. And then there was one final report that was issued by the Economic Affairs Interim Committee in 2015. It's a lengthy one. It's great work, and I can provide everybody a copy of that if you're interested, or a link to where you can find it on the legislature's website. And it detailed all of the different board reviews, all of the survey results, and recommendations. So some major themes based on the surveys and the hearings. So there were basically the conclusions was that licensure is essential to prevent unqualified or unethical practice, that professional standards should be maintained through education experience and continuing education, and that consumers really need to have an avenue for complaints. And that there was also another theme was that associations can't replace boards because they lack the regulatory authority and discipline enforcement. So those are necessary functions of a board that an association cannot fill. There was some talk about insurance reimbursement, and then also a conversation about if the Attorney General's office could take over the functions as the regulator, but that was determined that they are not positioned to act as the primary regulator just due to complexity and resources. So they talked about some administrative issues, fee structures, board control, financial stress. There was definitely some boards that were under financial stress. And then they suggested some administrative options for funding. And then public input, the main, I guess, summary of the public input was there was a great appreciation for monitoring and consumer protection. There were frustrations with some perceived micromanagement and inconsistent enforcement. And then there was also a debate over whether certain occupations needed licensing at all. So kind of going back to the same discussion points that were discussed in the 70s, and then also what this committee is kind of looking at. So all the boards that were reviewed did have justification for continuation, and that most of the licensees said that the board is important for public health and safety. The health-related boards obviously said that the most. Some of the other boards didn't have as much of a perceived public health impact. And then there was also discussion in there about scope of practice overlap, and especially in the health professions that could cause tension. So fees were a major complaint, especially for small licensee boards. There were financial challenges that were identified were boards with excess cash, or so they were overcharging their licensees. Or boards that were running deficits. And then heavy indirect costs billed by the Department of Labor and Industry. And then there was some antitrust issues that were noted. So that was that review. Again, it was supposed to go through 2018, and then they decided to repeal that statute -142. And so the Economic Affairs Interim Committee only did one round of sunset reviews for the actual boards before that became the review of boards and advisory councils is now it's discretionary. And so at the beginning of each interim, the interim committee can choose which councils and boards they want to review, but they are not required to review all of them. That's how the law is written now. So, what did we learn? Hopefully, you guys learned something. So, key themes throughout all of these different iterations of sunsets and reviews is that it's important to balance public protection with avoiding unnecessary regulation. And there was obviously a shift from automatic sunset to some targeted, purposeful reviews. There have always been ongoing concerns with board structure, fees, and administrative costs. Those conversations continue. And then there was persistent overlap and competition issues in some of the regulated professions. What did we learn? That regular review could improve clarity, efficiency, and accountability. Financial stability does depend on the board size, as well as cost control and transparency. If there are clear roles and rulemaking authority and board composition that could strengthen governance, and then broad stakeholder input does provide valuable insight into what works and what doesn't. And with that, I thank you for listening to me and would entertain questions or comments. I will turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair. And if you want, I'll go ahead and stop sharing, and so everybody can see everyone's faces instead of me.
Aaron, I will kick off first by saying thank you, and then I see Tanner has his hand raised. Tanner, before you go, I just had two notes that I took. The first was that I think the thing that rang most true to me was that this is nothing new. This is something that's been done many times before. And I'm just going to share my personal opinion. I think if this group could come up with something that could work long term, that might be of value to the legislature and to everybody else. The other one that jumped out, I don't know if the rest of the group spent as much time as I did reading the public comments that we received or not. But I did notice that in 1981, the slide mentioned the massage therapist, and one of the public comments did outline that their board terminated at that point in large part due to their decision, the profession's decision not to continue to be regulated in that way due to the cost that they were going to incur. So those were my takeaways. With that, Tanner, I'll yield the floor to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Aaron. Really appreciate you taking the time to do all this. That was super, super interesting. And I'm sure I will have a lot more research I need to do myself on this too. But I have a question for you, and that would be, or if anyone else knows this, I guess for this matter. So in the original sunset review process lasted 6 years, is what it sounds like. And then they changed the law. I looked at the MCA here, and it like you mentioned, it turned over kind of the reins from being legislatively driven to being executive branch driven. Directs the governor may furnish the legislative audit committee, on and on and on. My question is, has any governor ever taken advantage of that? Obviously, the legislature can go in and can repeal boards, but has a governor ever used this process to get rid of a board or a program or anything like that?
That's a great question. I don't know. I do know that the audit committee, they spend a lot of time kind of defining their work at the beginning of each interim. And I don't know how much of that is influenced by a governor's list, if that's even utilized anymore. That's a great question. That's something I can certainly try to dig into and see. I can reach out to my friends at the audit division and see if maybe they can help me out a little bit on that. But
That'd be great.
I don't know the answer right now.
Cool. One follow-up here. I think that my point there is that structure matters. How we go about this and who's doing it is going to matter, and I think that's going to be where we all have some fun debates on. So that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanner. Senator Noland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if I asked this before, but I was wondering who has complained the most about their boards. Maybe we should look at that first. So we have 15 people in cosmetology that have complained, or horse something or whatever. Who do we have a list? Somebody has a list of complaints. And so I was wondering, maybe, because I'd like to see that, because in my committee I hear, anyway, we have the privilege of hearing lots of anecdotal concerns, frustrations, and problems. And then, so maybe if we have a list of who seems to be, they feel their boards are causing them a problem, or boards aren't doing enough, or whatever that issue is, or the boards are saying we can't get our people to do it. What complaints do we have? Who do we have as the problem? Maybe that's for Aaron. I don't know.
Yeah, and I can have Jennifer Stallkamp jump in as well. I think this was asked at the last meeting or one of the meetings, and we kind of talked about how the complaint process that we have available on the department's website is really more towards licensees. It's not towards boards, but there. Yeah, I'm not sure if we collect that data as far as like somebody complaining about their board. Jennifer, you had a good answer last time this was asked.
Oh, did I?
You did. Yeah.
Okay, I hope someone else remembers it. But generally, Senator Noland, to answer your question, I think we don't keep track of complaints about the boards because usually folks come and make public comments at board meetings about something they want the board to address. And then the board either takes up the issue because it's kind of within the what the board's mission is, or says, no, that's not something we can do, but here are some other options that you might look at. So I don't know that we keep track of specifics like that, but I do know that the boards are responsive when folks come to them with concerns. And Alan and other association members might be able to speak to that as to how they've interacted with boards to complain or suggest ideas that they would like to see the boards take up.
And I guess just to respond to there, I think we have a very good relationship between the association and the board, and I appreciated that the one of the slides, rammed home that the associations have a different role and could not provide this function. The question I had related to Senator Nolan's question is, Aaron, one of the projects in the past had a survey, and it felt as though part of that survey was surveying the licensees. Do you know if any of that survey asked questions about their satisfaction with the board or not?
I can try to find it while we're talking. There was a lot in those surveys. That was during the interim committee review in 2011 and 2013, and the surveys were pretty extensive, and a lot of feedback was gathered. I condensed in my slides, in my presentation, I condensed like 150-page report done by the researcher that was staffing that interim committee at the time. Thankfully, it wasn't me. I don't know if I could have done as good of a report as she did. It's fantastic, and I can share it with everybody. But it's got all of the different survey questions. It's got the methodology and all the different questions that they asked. So I'm not going to be able to find it right now, but I can certainly provide that to the committee if you're interested in looking at her excellent work.
I guess my reaction would be if you could look into that, that would be outstanding for a future meeting. But that may also be something for this group to consider as we move into recommendations. If we can add something to capture Senator Nolan's question about the data. When folks ask questions about data and it doesn't exist, my default is always, well, how can we make it exist for future us, so that we can have those. Jen, the floor is yours now.
Thanks, Ellen, and thanks, Aaron. I know that this made your heart very happy to do this research and prepare this report. So I'm glad that you got to live out your bliss for the last couple weeks. I disagree with your daughter. I thought it got more interesting as it went on. I have a couple questions. First of all, I would like to see the 2015 report. Was it a Pat Murdo report?
It was, yep.
God, she was good.
I know. Hard shoes to fill.
Yeah, I think it took like 3 people for a couple of sessions to fill her shoes. Like, Pat was great. So I'm looking forward to reading that. I have 2 questions sort of around a different type of sunset, I guess, but more of a transfer. So I got an email from a member of the public after our last sunset meeting. And they gave an example of a sunset that wasn't really a sunset, but more of a transfer. So in 2007, Representative Paul Clark required regulation of alternative adolescent residential and outdoor programs. And so it created PARP. You guys are so good with acronyms. Board of Private Alternative Adolescent Residential or Outdoor Programs within labor, right? Big national scrutiny at the time, if you remember what was happening in 05 and 07 cycles. Their kids getting sent away and bad things happening to them at these wilderness camps. And about 10 years later, Senator Sands out of Missoula wanted it moved to DPHHS. So Senator Sands was very involved with both kiddos and corrections and didn't feel it was appropriate to be under labor, and a lot of people agreed with her. So it was moved under DPHHS. So that, I think, is a sunset in that it's no longer under Department of Labor and Industry, and a need still exists for that oversight, right? So to that end, in your research, did you find more like that? So I have a question like, were teachers always licensed under OPI, or did they start at Department of Labor? Or some of these more specialized, like guides and outfitters, were they ever under FWP? Things like that.
Yeah, so thank you, Jen. And that I know that Board of Adolescent, whatever, that one, the one that you just said, I don't remember the name of it offhand. It was part of a professional and occupational licensing board during economic affairs review because it is included in their report. And yeah, the timing obviously was Senator Sands did in 2017, and those reports were done in 2015. I don't know if that had anything to do with it, if it was called out during that the interim committee review, that maybe that wasn't the best location for it. But there's definitely evidence of boards and agencies moving in between, like you could see in the executive reorganization, Montana Outfitters Council was under FWP. And then at some point, it got moved to the Department of Labor, I guess, or maybe Commerce. I don't know. There was a lot of different changes. The audits that were done in the 79 and 80, they do talk about kind of the progression of the board, like when it was established, what it was originally called, and then how it all transferred and got to be where it was at that point in time. So I do know that Outfitters was one. Athletics, I think, was another one, or it kind of became a program, but it was for boxing and wrestling. It was codified in Title 23, which is parks and recreation or whatever it's called. And so it was never in Title 37. So there is there have been changes, and I don't think that there was a formal review aside from the executive reorganization that occurred in 1970 that really kind of shifted a bunch around. It was more probably industry-led or association-led to make those changes.
Thanks for that. And Mr. Lloyd, if you'd allow me just a follow-up either question or food for thought. We didn't, at least from my perspective, not a lot of focus was placed on that as one of the big examining points or question points that the governor issued to us. But I would think that as we go through these and we flag some that maybe need a review for sunset or whatever, that we also look at that as an option. Would it be more appropriate under another agency, right? Like Department of Labor and Industry are experts in making sure people have their certifications and accreditations in order and insurances and a really clean rulemaking and discipline process. And if a profession doesn't necessarily have a lot of those types of things happening, I'm going to guess barbers and cosmetologists, please do not come for me if that's not the case. But let's pretend another board also doesn't have a ton of that stuff. Maybe that is better served by moving under its policy area versus its administrative area. Again, no specifics in mind, members of the public who may be watching, none at all, simply an idea in the vapor.
And very gutsy to name a specific board. I'm sure your email will be filled shortly.
Well, barbers and cosmetologists, they're not good about giving input about the profession. That's a joke. They're very good about giving in profession. I'm gonna make sure my stylist gets some flowers now.
Other thoughts from the rest of the group? Again, Aaron, that was a fascinating presentation, and so I will preface this with I will probably have some questions that pop into my head over the weekend.
So one thing I would just like to ask the committee before we move on. So after hearing this, would it make sense to delve into the boards and programs topic before going on to what other states do for their sunset review? Or because right now the way that we have it organized is next meeting we'll do what other states' approaches are to sunsets. And then talk about boards and programs and all of that kind of stuff. If you guys want to keep it that way, that's fine. Or if you want to flip-flop those, I don't know if it's better to keep on the Montana track and then move on to, as you're looking at recommendations, what are some examples from other states?
I personally have no strong feelings on the order of operations. I would ask the group if anybody does have a strong feeling in that area.
Aaron, is there someone at NCSL you can reach out to that maybe has something like this in the can already and wouldn't require a huge lift on your part? And it's fine if it's like, I would say even up to 10 years old, because these professions don't pivot that rapidly. Because if it's already created and you don't have to do that extra work other than just contacting and say, yeah, email it to me, I would say yes. Otherwise, I don't have a huge appetite for it, speaking personally.
So are you asking if there's already publications regarding what other states do for sunsets?
Or maybe it's
Yeah.
or if a staffer in one of like CSG or NCSL or one of these organizations that works a lot with legislators in various states has that information already. Maybe born out of model legislation somewhere. Yeah, I guess that's
Yeah, I already have that information. So it was more just for if you guys want to continue on learning, because you already have that topic picked out, is getting into the boards and programs, the history and kind of the criteria and all that kind of stuff. If you want to learn about that first, or if you want the Institute for Justice, NCSL and CSG have all put out. They've done studies. Institute for Justice has like a 200-page report on all the different. It's sunrise and sunset, but it goes into all the different states and what they look at and all of that kind of stuff. So it's not a heavy lift for me to pull that information together. I already know where it is. I just didn't know if you guys wanted to hear about other states at the next meeting, or if you want to continue on with Montana and boards.
Sorry, I misunderstood the question.
That's okay. And we can keep it as is in the work plan for now. That's fine. I just need to know what to start pulling together for next time.
Aaron, my gut reaction is, whatever is the least amount of work for the staff.
Okay.
I don't think the order of those topics is hypercritical.
Okay. Okay.
I would also remind everybody that I am but one voice. If anybody else has strong feelings one way or the other, please share those. And then I'm going to do just one last call before we move on to review of data requests. Any other thoughts or comments related to the history lesson that we just received?
I just
All
want to say it
right.
was really great. So thank you, Erin.
Thank you, Stacy.
Fantastic. With that, Aaron, would you like to talk to us about the data requests?
Sure. So there was more than one data request that was asked for at the last meeting. But like I said, I am still working on pulling it together, and I think that providing it as we discuss those topics will probably be a little more helpful for you guys, especially those of you who are on multiple subcommittees. But the one report that was available that was asked for, I believe, Alan, you asked for it, was the biennial report. And so this is something that is in law that the department has to put together for the governor, or the governor's report on licensing, whatever you want to call it, every 2 years. And so the last one, the one that I sent to you guys, was published in June of 2024. So the licensing division is working on this biennium's version of this report. And so it should be out in the next few months. I imagine by June, July, sometime in the summer. I'm not gonna say exactly when, because I don't want to put any pressure on the people that are working on it. But what this report does, and there's other copies of it. These are all available. We put these out every 2 years, but it goes through each of the boards and talks about um, the well, first it talks about the new licenses, so you can see kind of that how many licenses the division has issued um, in the years, or the fiscal years, and talks a little bit about revenues and expenditures, and then some compliance statistics. And so these are all just data points that are interesting for people, and that are in this report. And then it goes through each board individually. So like, for example, the very first one, it's in alphabetical order. So Board of Alternative Healthcare, it talks about the activities that were conducted underneath each board. So inspections and audits, their individual revenues and expenditures, and then statistics on licenses, and complaints. And then the other thing that is included in each of these sheets, it talks about the if there were any legislative bills that affected that board. So, for example, in this one in 2023, there were 5 bills that were passed in 2023 that pertained to the Board of Alternative Healthcare. And if there was any court cases, those are identified. And just so this is kind of like a snapshot summary of the activities of each of the boards every 2 years that is required by the legislature. And there was one thing that was added that will be included in this year's report. I don't know if it's this year's report or not. But in the 2025 session, there was a provision that was added to the biennial report statute, to include information on appointments, board appointments, and how, I can't remember exactly how it's phrased, but basically how many positions are actually filled, how long they've been vacant, how long they took to get filled, information like that. That was, I believe, requested by Representative Carlin out of Missoula, to add for some transparency on board appointments. So you'll see that maybe in the 2026 report. I don't know, but I do know that that was passed in 2025. So that was that's one thing that will change to this report. So that's what this biennial report really is. It's just kind of some good snapshot information for each of the boards and then the division as a whole.
And I would encourage if you have not yet, just to give that document a quick skim. I always find that report is good at showing the breadth of what's going on across all of the boards. I know most folks are not concerned with all of the boards; they're concerned with the one that they deal with individually. But I think specifically for this group, as we are talking more holistically, it is very interesting to see, how much activity, and I would say specifically the legislative activity, is quite fascinating over time. Anything else on data for us, Aaron?
No, that like I said, that was the only report that I had readily available because I didn't have to produce it myself. But the other data points that were requested at the organizational meeting, I will continue to work on and provide at future meetings.
Fantastic. Uh, does any member of the subcommittee have any data topics before we move on? All right, hearing none. The next item on our list is the next meetings. Our next meeting is Friday, April the 24th, 9 a.m. And then after that, we have May 22nd, June 19th, and July 31st. So hopefully, as many of you as possible have those dates on your calendars, and we look forward to seeing you at those. With that, I think our last agenda item is public comment. Aaron, is the staff prepared for public comment?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So if you are a member of the public and you would like to provide comment, please raise your hand. And Alan, if I could have you read that little blurb on the agenda. As soon as you're done with that, then we will go ahead and call on anybody who has raised their hand from the public.
All right. Well, members of the public, get your raise the hand button ready. The subcommittee now offers the public in attendance an opportunity to comment on any public matter under the jurisdiction of the subcommittee that is not on the current agenda. The subcommittee cannot act, but will listen to comments and may ask staff to place the issue on a future agenda. The chair may limit the comment period to proceed with the subcommittee meetings. Public commenters should state their first and last name when offering comments.
Okay. I don't see any hands raised, so I don't know, maybe people stopped listening. But no, nobody's raised their hand, so I guess
Aaron?
yeah.
This is Jen. Maybe a reminder to those, if anybody dialed in, maybe it's not intuitive how to raise your hand if you've just called in. I'm just kind of thinking.
Okay. Yeah, what is it? Star 9? Star 6?
Yeah, it's one of them.
One of them?
One of
Okay.
them.
Try both. And then if you've called in and would like to provide public comment, I don't see any phone numbers listed. So I don't know if that makes a difference. But yeah, Mr. Chair, I don't see anybody that is interested in providing public comment today.
Outstanding. Well, I guess my other comment to those folks would be that you may also submit public comment through the website, and the committee members are receiving that information, and hopefully everybody is reading it. Some interesting things in there. With that, I believe that brings our agenda to an end. Aaron, we just wrap this thing up, right? Or
Yeah, so I will just make if there were I took one note on just one quick update for the work plan, so I will go ahead and make that update and then send it over to Senator Zolnikoff and Allen so they can prepare for the April 13th meeting, and then we'll just continue on the timeline that is provided in that in the work plan for our next meeting, we'll go over other states' approaches to sunset reviews. And if any of the requested data points, if I can find answers to those, I will have them prepared for the next meeting at the end of April.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everybody for your time, and we will see you, if not in another subcommittee, at the next meeting of this one.
Thanks,
Thank you
Alan.
very much, everybody.
Thanks, staff.